Hi everyone, welcome and thanks so much for joining us tonight for our event with Reza Farazmand for his debut graphic novel City Monster. My name is Evan Karp. I am the events manager for Booksmith. We're an independent bookstore and a mainstay of San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district since 1976. Tonight though, we're of course here to celebrate City Monster, the debut graphic novel by Reza Farazmand. City Monster is set in a world of supernatural creatures and follows a young monster who moves to the city. His roommate is a ghost who can't remember the past, and their neighbor is a vampire named Kim. Together, they explore the city, searching for answers about life, memories, and where to get a good beer. Reza Farazmand lives and draws in Los Angeles. He started putting his comics on the internet in college at poorlydrawnlines.com and was soon surprised to learn that this activity could make for an actual career. His work has since been featured in and around such places as television sets, websites, magazines, and now this book. When he's not writing or drawing, Reza enjoys drinking coffee and looking at things on screens. He is generally a pretty good guy. That's it for me tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. Special thanks and congratulations to Reza. We're very happy to have you here with us tonight, and I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks for having me here. Hi, everyone. I'm Reza. First off, I just want to say thank you all for coming to my book talk, and thanks to the Booksmith for hosting. I actually used to live in San Francisco and would go to the Booksmith, and I can say from experience that they have an awesome selection of graphic novels and comics, which is not something that you find at every bookstore, so I always loved going in there. Of course, I do wish we could be doing this in person, but obviously there are more pressing issues going on in the world right now than in-person book talks. And I actually think this is a really cool format anyway, because with a live book talk, I'm usually just talking to people in one city or town. But now with this virtual book talk, I can talk to people from multiple cities and towns. So that's pretty neat. One thing to note is that I am going to be doing a slideshow, and it might be a little hard for me to time these slides I'm showing without direct audience feedback. So I'm going to do my best to leave each slide up for a while so you all have time to look at it. And I'm going to start up this slideshow right now by sharing my screen. Just a moment. And I'm going to press play. Okay. I think you all should be able to see that now. Correct me if I'm wrong, Evan. So as I said, my name is Reza, and you probably know me from my comic series, Poorly Drawn Lines, which typically looks something like this. Just imagine everyone in the audience laughing around you together, happily, in a perfect world. Sometimes my comics look like this. And because I love drawing comics, a couple years ago, I decided I wanted to make the ultimate comic, a graphic novel. I've actually thought about doing a graphic novel for a long time, but a couple of years ago, I decided I was really going to commit to making it happen. That book eventually became City Monster. But before I could finish City Monster, or even really get started, the first thing I had to do was figure out how to make a graphic novel. I'm very used to drawing comic strips, which begin and end in just a few panels, but a graphic novel was mostly new territory for me. And in doing some research, I discovered that one of the main characteristics of a graphic novel is that it is actually much bigger than a comic strip. One of my typical comic strips usually looks kind of like this and goes a little bit like something, something, and then something else. But with a graphic novel, it's more like something, 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 and then like 100 more pages of stuff. So it's a little bit bigger and there's a little bit more space to fill. And conventional wisdom says that you fill that space with two main features, characters and a story. Now I have some experience with characters from my time doing Poorly Drawn Lines. Here's one of those characters, this nameless gray mouse that I use pretty often. But the thing about this nameless gray mouse that I use pretty often is that I use him for all kinds of roles and situations. At times, he's a disgruntled charlatan. At other times, he's an anxious wreck. And at other times, he is a confident fool. The great thing about this mouse is that he can basically be a comedic vessel for whatever joke I feel like writing on any given day. But with this graphic novel, I wanted to create characters with more defined personalities who I could follow through an entire story rather than just one or two situations like I'm used to writing. From the start, I knew the story would be about a Bigfoot type monster who moves from the forest to the city. That was the first shred of an idea I had for the whole thing. I've personally been new to several cities, and I wanted to capture some of those experiences in this story while also making it completely absurd and surreal. And while I started conceptualizing the story with one character, the book eventually ended up being about three characters: the monster, the ghost who haunts his apartment, and their vampire neighbor. The monster would be the wide-eyed city newcomer, the vampire would be the experienced city dweller, and the ghost would be a bit of a mystery, inhabiting his own odd reality between worlds. And the way I initially went about writing the story was actually really similar to how I write comic strips. I imagined these three characters in different situations and wrote funny dialogue to go with it. That gave me a sense of who the characters would be and how they'd react to things in different situations, and the kind of humor that I was going to use, but it didn't immediately give me a clear way to tie all this together into a story. But then at some point, I wrote this scene with the monster and the ghost talking, where the ghost says he can't remember anything about when he was alive because he's been in limbo for so long. But he's also smoking weed heavily throughout the whole conversation, so you get the sense that he might just be really stoned and forgetful. And then I followed that idea into the monster and the vampire trying to figure out who the ghost was, which became a big part of the story I eventually wrote. That story ends up taking the characters all over the city, which is in a kind of perpetual state of Halloween, filled with monsters, spirits, and magic. They walk places. They meet a mummy. They hang out with a witch. They get snacks. They run places. And then something, and then something, and then something else. And then like 100 more pages of stuff. So just like a comic strip, except different in a few very important ways. Outside of characters and story, one of the things I wanted to do with this book was make more use of backgrounds and scenery. In my comic strips, the characters are often standing in a blank, undefined space, which works great for a short comic where setting might not be as important. But with City Monster, I wanted to give a sense that the story actually takes place somewhere, and I wanted it to have a defined look and feel. That meant drawing things like buildings, streets, rooms, and skylines. I still kept it all pretty minimal and simple and straightforward, but I found that just a few background elements in every scene helped to give some depth to the setting. Here's a coffee shop scene from early on. And this forest scene, which is the first page of the book, actually was one of the most time-consuming backgrounds to draw with all the trees and thick greenery. I more or less gave up on trees after this page and stuck to drawing buildings for the rest of the book. I also wanted to keep a consistent color palette throughout City Monster with lots of deep blues and purples to give the city this feeling of permanent twilight. At the same time, I used a lot of lighter pastel colors on the buildings to contrast with the dark skies and surroundings and give the streets a sort of almost inappropriately colorful vibe compared to their surroundings. This is the exterior of the coffee shop, which I made pink. Here are some of the buildings and scenery I used as reference. These are mostly from internet searches, but I also snapped a lot of pictures of city scenery on my phone while I was working on the book that I could refer back to later. There's a couple more. For the cover, I pulled inspiration from old monster movie posters, specifically the kind of awesome looking scary typeface that you'd see a lot back then. Here are a few more. I also pulled a lot from the Universal monster movie canon when I was choosing what kind of supernatural creatures I'd use. So I have a lot of classics like mummies and vampires in there. And all of these posters are by the artist Carolee Gross, who was art director at Universal Pictures for most of the 1930s. And these are all Universal monster films that are being advertised here. Here's a few more. Another general inspiration for the book was the band The Cramps, who I was listening to a lot while writing City Monster. They had this cool, campy horror aesthetic, and I was trying to evoke some of that attitude and style throughout the story, particularly whenever I drew Kim the vampire. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I had a few other things that I wanted to show you. I've got some practical props for you. Let me actually pull out of my share screen so you can see me a little bit bigger here. Okay, I think I should probably be full screen now, more or less. And here is one of the pages from the book. I draw everything on Bristol board, first with a blue lead pencil, and then I go over it with black micron pens. Use a slightly thicker pen for the panels and a thinner pen for the interiors. This is that coffee shop scene, just in ink, that I showed you earlier. Here's another scene when the monster has collapsed on the couch after failing to figure out his life. And this is the cover, what would ultimately become this. And I actually drew the title separately because I wanted to draw it big. And then I cut it out. All of these pages get digitized in Photoshop, where I do all the coloring and editing. So I could just cut it out and place it directly onto the cover. And then this is a sheet of text that I use to make text corrections if I needed to change a speech balloon or add text in somewhere. Because when you're drawing in traditional media, any edits have to be done like from scratch, basically. And this is what the actual hard copy of the book looks like, 100 or so pages of Bristol board with pencil and ink. So yeah, that's what the graphic novel looked like while I was working on it. And that is pretty much all I have for you as far as structured presentation. And then I just wanted to open up the rest of it to any questions that you all might have.
Awesome. Thank you, Reza. That was really, really cool. I really enjoyed seeing a little bit about your process and some of the drawings. I do have one question that's come in. I just want to encourage everyone who's watching to ask a question. If you have one for Reza, now's your chance. So drop it in the chat. The first one, though, comes from Shervin, who is wondering, Reza, if you would care to share with us the backstory of the character names Kevin and Ernesto.
I came up with those names so long ago that it's almost hard to remember, but I think I was just trying to come up with sort of unexpected names. Well, in the case of Kevin, it's just sort of maybe an innocuous name that you wouldn't think would go with a funny cartoon character. But yeah, so I guess I was just trying to go with like as regular a name as possible for Kevin. And for Ernesto, I think I was trying to go with a name that felt like almost like out of place. Like Ernesto feels like an older man's name to me or something. And the Ernesto that I was drawing was like, I don't know, a young person basically with lots of young person problems. So it was always sort of funny to contrast their names with the kind of actions that they would do.
Nice. I'm wondering, it's cool how you said the corrections needed to be done kind of from scratch for this. I'm wondering if there were any other kind of differences in terms of preparing the graphic novel as opposed to the strips.
A lot more like foresight and planning. I had to know where every page was leading, basically. And then another thing is I would do a lot of the paneling far in advance. So I would like draw out the panels for like 5 or 10 pages in advance, knowing where every character was going to be and where all the actions and stuff was going to be in the scene. So I would have it like plotted out for several pages in advance, and then just sort of like fill in the panels as I went, basically. Whereas with a strip, it's just like one joke, one contained scenario in every with every instance, basically. So yeah, more planning and more thought, and yeah, it was almost like I had to like arrange a big board in front of me with like strings connecting different things together, and like have a timeline of events, and yeah, and like really plot it out so I knew that every page would connect the way it needed to.
Very cool. So you're ready to like join the CSI team. You're like,
yeah, yeah, basically.
Do you feel like that it is changing the way that you approach strips, or is this just kind of like a separate muscle that you've developed now?
It felt like, oh shoot, did I just change my speaker? Can you still hear me? It felt similar in a lot of ways. I think it's like a new muscle that I developed though, and that I'll try to apply to other things. Like writing a longer narrative it's been a part of Poorly Drawn Lines a couple of times where I'll do like a week of one story or something. But yeah, it was definitely like, it felt like a new muscle that I was learning how to use. And so I feel like there are some things that I learned that I might apply back, like trying to do more extended arcs or like longer stories within Poorly Drawn Lines. Yeah.
Very cool. We've got some more questions coming in. This one is from Jason, who says, the seance scene is one of my favorite parts of the book because of how it builds an absurdity. How did that come about?
Yeah, I love the seance scene too. Also because the setting feels so like regular. It's just somebody's living room. The way I wrote most of the book was kind of like a stream of consciousness dialogue, basically. So I ended up writing the whole thing in kind of like a 30-page Word document where I was like writing dialogue and writing in action as it went. So all of the scenes were meant to feel kind of like organic conversations. And the seance scene was yeah, similar. I was trying to think of the most like normal and innocuous way that I could portray a seance to make it funnier. And yeah, it just kind of came about as just writing like continuous rapid fire dialogue, basically. And that scene was actually a little bit harder to frame because it has like the most characters who appear in one frame at a time, and it was still like a pretty small frame. So I had to kind of like block that scene out so that everything made sense and it wasn't like too overwhelming to look at.
Very cool. We've got a question here from Broden, who is wondering what made you choose classic horror as a theme for the characters?
I really like the campiness and the silliness of old horror and old monster movies. Filmmakers were doing the best they could with like the practical effects they had and the budget limitations they had and the technical limitations they had. And they still made like really entertaining, cool looking films. But in hindsight, they're obviously like in the same way that special effects from 20 years ago or CGI looks funny now, it kind of, yeah, so it sort of lends itself to comedy in a lot of ways, while also just being a cool subject to work with, because I love using like magic and surrealism and absurdity, and it doesn't get much more like surreal than monsters, I guess. Yeah.
True. The next question I have is from Kristen Hildebrand, who says, "Hey Reza, did you know how the story would conclude when you started it?"
Hey Kristen, yeah, I had a good idea of where it was going to go. I knew that it was kind of, well, I guess I don't, in case anyone hasn't read it, I want to say exactly what the conclusion is or anything, but yeah, I had a kind of a broad story structure in mind, and then I sort of filled in a lot of the blanks as I went. So I basically had like a broad, like 3 acts in mind. And I was trying to keep, since it was my first like extended narrative in my first graphic novel, I was trying to keep a fairly simple story structure with like point A, B, and C. And so, yeah, I had an idea of where it was going to go. And then it was just a matter of like filling in the details, basically.
Did you have, were there works that you were kind of consulting as inspirations while you were working on this, whether those be also graphic novels or, you know, albums, for instance, perhaps that you were listening to on loop or anything like that?
Yeah, well, just off of albums, I was listening to the Cramps. It's one album called "Songs the Lord Taught Us" that is really good, and has a lot of like spooky Halloween theme songs on it. And as far as like other comics and graphic novels, I checked out the graphic novels by this artist Tom Gauld, who's a really great cartoonist, and he has a couple of graphic novels. One is called Goliath and one is called Moon Cop, and they're also like shorter, on the shorter end graphic novels, like really beautifully drawn and laid out. And so I looked at those to kind of get an idea. I looked at those and other graphic novels to get an idea of like how to structure a story and how to lay it out. And I also looked to TV sitcoms in a way to get an idea of like how to structure like a fairly short story, and like how to come up with those different acts and how to give characters motivation and yeah, have like a compelling narrative basically, and also like wrap it all up and make it funny at the same time.
For sure. That's awesome. We hosted Tom for Baking with Kafka. He's great.
Oh, cool. Yeah, he's definitely a big inspiration. I love his comics, and his graphic novels are great too.
Awesome. I asked the music selfishly because Charlie is asking. It looks like you've got a keyboard in the background. Do you make music too?
Yeah, I do. I have my keyboard, and I also have my collection of guitars and / bass back there.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I make some music just basically here in my studio, and that's, yeah, but nothing that I like put out to the world or anything like that.
Do you ever try to come up with music that is kind of a little soundtrack to stuff you're working on, or do you have like a confluence there at all?
I guess I haven't directly tried to do that, but I have been working on some animation stuff in the background, aside from my regular comic work, and I've gotten to work with a friend of mine who's producing some music for the animation. So I've gotten to kind of hear one person's interpretation of like poorly drawn lines in song, basically, which has been really cool. So yeah, although I haven't really done it directly myself, I have gotten to hear like PDL as music, basically, or like my comics as music, which is cool.
That's awesome. So I have a question from Odessa, who is wondering, how would you say you've grown as an artist since you started poorly drawn lines in college?
I would say more confident in my voice and style, and yeah, more confident in my writing abilities, and more willing to kind of take risks and try new things. And also maybe more kind of like restless to try new things as well, because I've been a comic strip artist for solidly full-time for like 6 or 7 years now, probably even more than that, maybe 8 years. And yeah, in the past few years, I've definitely been feeling an urge to kind of like branch out and try new things. So graphic novel, animation, yeah. So I guess in that way, I feel more confident to try new things, and also more like, yeah, willing to kind of try new things and yeah, expand my horizons a little bit.
So the next question is from Jason, who is wondering why did you choose to do a new story from scratch rather than an expansion of the characters from Poorly Drawn Lines?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was trying to think of an idea for a graphic novel, one of my initial ideas was just to take like the Ernesto and Kevin world and expand that into a story. But then I guess I just wanted to do something new. I wanted to come up with something completely new and have new characters and maybe have like a new world that I could expand on and do other things in, basically. So yeah, I feel like the world of City Monster kind of exists in like almost like a parallel dimension or something to Poorly Drawn Lines. And now I feel like I have the option to kind of like play around in both worlds if I wanted to. And again, I also just really have always loved like monsters and magic and fantasy. And I wanted to like combine that into a world that also felt like mundane and ridiculous and absurd like my regular comics do.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask if you, now that you have kind of the City Monster characters in your toolbox, if you've imagined like writing the kind of not single panel, but like the single joke type comics with them, a little spin-off perhaps.
Yeah, I think I could do that. I think that would be really fun because when I got to the end of writing the book, I was like, it was almost like, I don't know, like parting with a group of friends or something, because I basically been like living with these characters for the months that I was working on the book. So if I did do like separate one-off strips with them, I'm not sure I would put it under Poorly Drawn Lines, but maybe, yeah. But I could totally see that happening, if anything, just as a way to kind of like keep that part of my brain warmed up as far as like writing those characters and to sort of be inspired to come up with something new with them down the line.
Awesome. Are you do you foresee continuing kind of their world in a long form, or are you what are you working on now? Are you working on another graphic novel, or
no, I'm not working on another graphic novel. I just did 2 books in a row. I had one come out in 2019 and one coming out now. So I think I'm going to take a little bit of a breather and try to come up with the next one. And it might, I don't have any solid ideas at this point. I think I would love to do something else with these characters. But yeah, there's nothing solid locked in. And given what I was saying about wanting to try new things, I feel like maybe the next thing I do would be something completely different as well.
Very cool. I have a question from Kristen, or from JR via Kristen, which is if film or other styles of writing or art that isn't comic animation based is interesting to you. I guess I know music is a little bit. If you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, JR. I would love to. Well, to start, I always saw Poorly Drawn Lines as like a way to practice comedy writing. That was why I initially kept doing it. Because I wanted to be a comedy writer and I saw myself potentially being a TV writer. And so now, but then Poorly Drawn Lines kind of like became my career almost by accident. And I mean, that's not to say there wasn't a lot of hard work involved and I had to like really push to make it actually happen. But it was initially supposed to be something where I was practicing other kinds of writing and practicing like honing in joke writing. So yeah, now that I'm interested in doing new different things, I think I would absolutely look to like film and TV writing. Yeah.
That's awesome. I have a question from Nancy Lambert, who is wondering if you have a creative routine.
Creative routine. Yeah, I tend to get up around the same time every day. I'm usually up and at my desk by like 7:15 with a cup of coffee and kind of just like sit down in front of a blank page. Whether sometimes I'll sit down in front of like an open Word document and just try to start typing jokes. And sometimes I'll just sit down in front of a blank piece of paper or now my iPad that I've been drawing on more and just try to like come up with something from scratch. So it's a pretty like loose routine as far as routines go, but it all centers around like early morning and yeah. Because I feel like that's when my like creative juices are flying the best or whatever.
Awesome. I've got a question from Meta. Basu, who is wondering, says, Reza, love your work. It brings me so much surprised laughter. Is there a particular animal character from your comics that you identify with? Where do you get inspiration for your characters?
The animal characters, I guess probably the mouse, just because he feels so like small and helpless, but is also like doing his best to be confident and strong and whatnot. So he like goes back and forth between being like a physically, vulnerable creature, and then he'll sometimes like don a top hat and suddenly he's like selling real estate or whatever. So yeah, I guess probably the mouse. He's just like trying to get by basically, and the world is against him. But then I also obviously love Kevin and Ernesto, and Trashbird would be some of my favorites. And I just love drawing little birds like Kevin and Trashbird, and I draw all kinds of birds because birds are, I mean, just in real life, like watching a bird is great comedy. They have like really physically funny like gestures and motions that they do. So yeah, birds, great comedic inspiration.
Very cool. And is there, I think you sort of answered the second question, but where do you get inspiration for your characters? Is it just from like, do you go for walks, and are you just like on the hunt for things that interest you, or where does it come from?
Yeah, I think it comes from, sometimes it'll come from like seeing an animal or a person do something funny, and sometimes it'll be from, I'll like sit down and write a joke and then decide like what little creature fits that joke best, or what what form the character can take that will make that joke more absurd or funnier or ironic in some way. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you all for your questions. I think that's all I have right now. So if any of you are watching and are holding on to a question, now's your chance to ask Reza anything that you please. I'll wait here for a moment and see if you guys, if anything comes up. But Reza, meanwhile, anything that you'd like to leave us with?
Pick up the book, I guess, take a look at it, see what you think. It is, yeah, obviously it's available through Booksmith, and yeah, get a copy with a signature in it. Yeah, other than that, I mean, I'm getting back into the swing of things with Poorly Drawn Lines. I've had a lot of other side projects going on, including this book. But now I'm feeling like I have a little bit more time to like refocus on PDL and hopefully do some like longer form strips coming up.
Awesome. Well, I have a question from Odessa, which just came in and made me chuckle. Can we get more Trashbird? Is the question.
Yeah, definitely. I'll keep doing. I get that question a lot. People want more Trashbird because Trashbird was his own whole separate comic for a while on this site called Webtoons, and then the comic ended, and now I kind of just cameo him in Poorly Drawn Lines every now and then. So yeah, I'll do more Trashbird. I think people seem to identify with him.
A question from Jason, which is, how did you get your first book deal in Poorly Drawn Lines?
The first book deal came about, it was actually around the time that I was thinking about like kickstarting a book and doing a book. And I actually hadn't even really seriously considered going with a traditional publisher at that point. I was thinking just to self-publish, which a lot of cartoonists were doing at that time. And then an editor at Penguin reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in doing a book. And then from there directed me basically to find an agent so that I could actually like pitch a book to Penguin, because I think you have to have an agent to pitch to certain publishers. And so, yeah, she kind of like guided me on how to find an agent. And then my agent guided me on how to put together a pitch. And then we pitched the book together, and yeah, they liked it. The first Poorly Drawn Lines book, which was in, I can't remember when that was now, 2015, I think, or I think 2015. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yes, it was kind of just a matter of luck from just putting my this editor had basically found my stuff online. So it was just a matter of putting my stuff out there, and yeah, a little bit of luck and a little bit of just making myself seen basically by putting a lot of stuff on the internet.
Jennifer is wondering, what inspires your sense of humor, and how long did it take you to write City Monster?
My sense of humor, I think, is inspired by, it's hard to say, it's just like everything. I feel like I'm just constantly taking in the world and finding ways to make it funny in my head and process it a certain way. I think I just have like a natural absurdity filter where I just I don't know. I feel like everything just feels a little bit funnier to me. And then as far as writing City Monster, I first came up with it like 2.5 years ago, like the idea, and then pitched it. And then the actual drawing process, I think, was about 8 months of actually drawing every page. And then the writing process was like a few months prior to that. And then some of the writing happened during the drawing process as well. A little bit of it was concurrent. Yeah, so I guess the whole thing, you could say, took like about a year.
Yeah, I was going to ask how much if you did the writing first, how much of that changed once you had the panels laid out?
Yeah, not too much of it, like the overall big story, but there were certain scenes that changed, and there were certain like big side stories that I cut out, or like characteristics for. Like at one point I was imagining Kim the vampire being like hundreds of years old and like making that a big part of the story. But then it just didn't feel right within the context of the story. And it felt like I could save a backstory like that for something else, and that it didn't need to be featured super heavily in this story. Yeah. But then, yeah, I mentioned that I did another book last year. So I basically finished that book and turned it in like June or July of 2019, and then rolled right into doing City Monster, and was writing it for like the last like few months of the year, and then drawing it for the majority of like the first half of 2020.
Kristen is wondering, how much does your location play a role in your creativity, and how has COVID affected that, if it has?
I think location, it probably plays a bigger role than I even realize. It's kind of hard when I try to think about like my influences and inspiration. It's hard to feel it, like to summarize it, I guess, in the moment without like taking a step back several years later. But now, like for instance, I can look back and see how living in San Francisco for several years kind of affected me, and how like living with my friends during that time was inspiration in a certain way. Moving and just changing locations can sometimes like set off new forms of inspiration without even realizing it. Yeah. Was there a second part of that question?
Yeah, just if COVID has changed that at all, or.
Oh, yeah. So actually, I guess about like midway through COVID, when everyone in my neighborhood was starting to take the lockdown really seriously, there was this period where the streets started to feel really empty, like more so than usual. And so I kind of drew from some of that scenery of just like empty streets to put into City Monster, because it had like a very like spooky, almost like supernatural feel or something, where it was like all of a sudden this busy LA neighborhood was like almost empty. So I drew from some of that to give the city and City Monster like a kind of spookily empty feel. Yeah. But yeah, and then also another thing COVID forced me to do was just to not leave my house basically, and to get this book done. Yeah.
Awesome. We have a couple more questions here. Charlie wants to know, you have stuff go viral and get stolen a lot. How do you deal with and think about being an artist online?
Yeah, that's something I've kind of just had to get used to and kind of, I guess, get numb to in a way, or almost embrace. Yeah, I've had a few comics that one of the most annoying things is if somebody will just take like the text from my comic and tweet out the text as like as if it's like their own original joke or something. And so that can be kind of annoying. But yeah, I guess at a certain point, I just got used to my stuff being reposted uncredited. So at this point, if it's like, unless it's really blatant or if it's being used for commercial purposes, I usually will just ignore it and just think about the benefits of my work being seen by more people. Yeah.
Nice.
Even if I don't directly benefit from it or whatever financially, it's still like, yeah, just my visual style getting out there or my writing style getting out there is cool.
Mm-hmm. Karen wants to know, what sitcoms did you watch when you were studying short comedic narratives?
A great one is Community, which is an old NBC sitcom. Well, not too old, but great because it has like really fun characters and fun stories, but it's also like super meta. So the whole thing almost feels like a study of TV writing, while also being like a very fun, watchable show. So yeah, I think Community is a good one. And then some of my favorites are just like The Office, Parks and Rec, Adventure Time for animated shows. Yeah, so there's some good ones there.
Awesome.
And then also like old Adult Swim shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Metalocalypse. Yeah, those are like the absurd, surreal animation right there. So I think there's a ton of inspiration to be had from those shows.
For sure. Yes. Big fan of Aqua Teen, the first few seasons of Aqua Teen specifically.
Yeah.
So Alexandra is wondering, aside from the Cramps, what other music or bands do you listen to and that might inspire your work?
Well, specifically through writing City Monster, I was listening to the Cramps, Angel Olsen, who has like this incredible, like almost like ghostly, like otherworldly voice that felt very inspiring while I was writing City Monster. This band, the OCs, who I really like, and they have a lot of like horror and cartoon content in their work, interestingly. And they have some like really cool music videos as well that are like animated. So yeah, them, Velvet Underground, to like get in the mood of like, I don't know, just like cool city kids hanging out. And yeah, there was quite a few because I actually was like, I was kind of trying to like create a whole playlist based on like the musical inspirations I had for the book. So I might put out this playlist at some point. It's like 50 songs or something that I was streaming it over and over again while I was writing this book. There's also this musician called, I think it's Jocko Gardner. And he has some really cool, like, again, otherworldly kind of ambient music that I would put on in the background while I was writing.
Awesome. Yeah, I would be interested in checking that out.
Yeah.
If you share it. Looks like that's all the questions we have. Yeah, Reza, this has been amazing. Really, really fun to have you here. And congratulations on the book, man. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for hosting.
My pleasure. For those of you who are tuned in, thanks for joining us tonight. And if you don't already have a copy of City Monster, you should get one from Booksmith. We'll send it right to you in time for the holidays. And yeah, take care and be well out there, everybody. Hope to see you at one of our future events. Reza, nice to meet you. Thanks again.
Nice meeting you, Evan. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye, everyone. Take care.